It's time for On Frame, the only weekly soccer-specific radio show in the state of Utah. For the next 2 hours, you'll get insight and information on everything from Real Salt Lake and Major League Soccer to anything happening around the globe in the beautiful game. On Frame is presented by For Home Control. Plug into the future. If you'd like to make yourself heard with the guys, pick up the phone and call 877-353-0700. Now, here's your host for On Frame, James Rust, Brian Dunseth, and Trey Fitz-Gerald on ESPN 700.
And a good Monday evening to you. That's right, Monday. We are now on Mondays. Moving forward, James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. This is On Frame. We think, Trey, positive thinking here, Trey. Positive thinking. Mondays moving forward. And we'll be talking soccer with you for the next 2 hours right here on your home of Real Salt Lake, ESPN 700. And guys, I guess the best place to start is the heartbreak in Houston. It looked like Real Salt Lake was on the doorstep of at least 1 point. Nick Rimando had come up huge on multiple occasions, and then it kind of all fell apart there in extra time.
Yeah, and one of the conversations I was having with a couple players, not only with Real Salt Lake but with the Houston Dynamo, was that's one of those games where you look back and you say, I could see Houston getting 3 points. I could see Real Salt Lake getting 3 points, and I could see both teams staying zero and getting the split. I mean, if you go back and you think about some of the big saves that Nick Rimando and Tally Hall made throughout the course of the night, you go back particularly the breakaway opportunity for Ned Grabavoy on Tally Hall, a little kick save, and then just an incredible save, a snap-down header from Nat Borchers, comes down off the ground, bounces back up, and Tally Hall somehow gets that 6'5" frame all the way across, puts it out. But, you know, for Nick Rimando, it's for that ball, and it's so hard to put, a ton of pressure on Nick's shoulders for taking this loss, because if you think about it, it's a huge save on Brad Davis. Nick, with that save, breaking all the records in Major League Soccer for goalkeepers facing penalties. I want to say he was, Trey, 39 for 56
That's
at
correct.
that time.
Yeah.
And so you look back, and we actually pulled it back in the truck. It was 92 minutes, 47 seconds when the foul was committed. 3 minutes of added extra time indicated by the fourth official, a game which saw 2 penalties. Houston Dynamo head coach Dominic Kinnear sent off, and the final play, that final ball whipped in, no pressure. You got Matt Conji somehow getting in behind the defense, able to chest it down, and as he's chesting it, Nick's come off his line. And, the first thing out of Nick Rimando's mouth in the post-game interview was that if I had the opportunity for that play again, I wouldn't make the same decision. And you got to respect it. And how many times Nick's come through this season, I think the unfortunate part for RSL, it was, even a point on the road right now at this stage of the season, it doesn't just help as you build into that final playoff spot. You're trying to get the top 2 spots in the Western Conference, but I think more psychologically, it's a big port to take on the road.
Well, and people were killing Nick after the game, and I just had a hard time with how well he played all game long, and I was standing behind the goal, and as soon as that ball popped up, he went off his line. Like, he said, I'm going to get this. And I personally like that kind of assertion from him. And, it was unlucky that, the ball hits Kanji in the stomach. He gets to Kanji's shoulder really a split second late. And, the referee had no choice but to make that call. But Nick had been so massive all game long, and it still just seemed incongruous, even though Nick said, I made a mistake, and Jason said, Nick's got to want that one back. After how well he played for 90 minutes and how much he carried that team and really, I guess, navigating RSL through a poor call on the first penalty. And again, Schuler shouldn't have pushed the guy in the back, but the ball was passed, whatever. It's easy to kind of say that when you have the luxury of slow motion instant replay. But it just didn't seem right to still call Nick the GOAT of that game.
Yeah, well, and Downey, you brought up the fact that it's a cruel game at times, and Nick Rimando, in just a matter of seconds, really goes hero to GOAT, and he joined us on the radio post-game, and he said it's one of those balls that as soon as I made up my mind to go for it, I have to go for it. You can't just slam on the brakes, because then I'm in no man's land, and what do I do from there? I'm putting my team in a bad spot there. So just one of those 50-50 balls, and it just happened that maybe he didn't make the right decision at that point.
Yeah, but here I go back to something Jason Kreis has been talking about all season long. If we're defending as a team. It's not just our back four. It's not just the goalkeeper and a decision that's made in a split second. As a team with 11 players on the field, and you go back historically, these two teams, just on the season alone, 30 goals have been scored in the final 15 minutes between these two teams. And you think about what an advantage it is to have the heat and humidity in Houston, and a team that was just completely ravaged, not only by international call-ups, losing 4 players, but they lost 4 players as well because of sickness in the team. They were going to play a 4-4-2 formation. Nate Sturgis, Brian Ching both pulled out sick before the game. They actually sent Nate Sturgis home as soon as he showed up at the stadium because he was that sick. So a team that kind of put it all together at the final moments, went back to the 4-3-3. Matt Conji wasn't even supposed to play. And then on top of that, goes down to the final seconds. Poor pressure on the service from the flank. Terrible decision along the back line to allow Matt Conji in behind. As a defender, it's the last thing you can do. And then Nick tries to make up for it because he sees it happening in a split second. He tries to make amends. He tries to go and punch through the ball, clear pressure. If he clears that ball, point saved, 0-0 on the road, and another shutout for Real Salt Lake, which would have been the 4th consecutive shutout.
Yeah, just one of those really crazy games. A lot of players missing on both sides, Dunny, as you alluded to. And just unfortunate because it looked like Real Salt Lake was about to pick up a point, and it all went south in extra time.
And if Grabavoy, rounds Tally Hall, he makes a great play, but he had a chance to give us our first ever victory in the state of Texas, and I can't explain it, Dunny. I know you've been talking a little bit this week about how Seattle's never lost in Dallas. They're coming from a cool climate, but we come from altitude into that humidity down there in Dallas and Houston, and it's a lot like a lot of teams can't come here and handle the humidity or the altitude.
It's funny. I think it kind of goes back to with Real Salt Lake and how in the beginning, the first couple of years, terrible on the road, and then all of a sudden you heard, from the players themselves changing the speak, which was, we're hoping for a good result, which is, we're confident that we're going to come back with 3 points. We're going to play our style. We're not going to deviate regardless of who we're playing against. And once that little switch flipped in their mind psychologically, you saw a different team on the road. And I think that's, as much as the physical aspect comes into play, no matter what. You used to see Miami Fusion dominate. You used to see, not too often did you see Tampa Bay Mutiny dominate because they just weren't that good after the first season. But when you have that type of heat and humidity, it's one thing Shel Simon's been saying all year. I wish we had more home games in the middle of summer because it's a huge, huge advantage in our favor. And it's absolutely correct.
Real quick, and then we got to get out to the phones. We got a call. Does the league take into account altitude and heat and humidity when putting together the schedule?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think even if they did, it gets minimized by the fact that you look at how fiercely we try to defend our home turf,
right,
and how crazy our fans are at home games and how loud and awesome they are. So, I mean, every fan base has that same pride and passion, and the best road teams in the history of this league have only won 7 or 8 road games in a year. So, we started out 4-2-2 on the road. We've gone winless in our last 6, and we're still 4 points away from tying our franchise high for points on the road. So it's such a fine line, but it's just I think another. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dunny, but I think it's just another example of a parity-driven league.
Yeah, the only thing that I see is early in the season you'll see the northeastern teams end up playing on the road, and that's why you usually get Houston and DC starting, or Houston and FC Dallas starting out with a couple home games, and it's just because you have to take into account fans. You have to take into account how big of a walk-up it is in Major League Soccer, because we're still not to the point where we're selling out at stadiums, with the exception of a very limited few stadiums in Major League Soccer. So on the East Coast and in places that are hit really, really hard by weather and where the walk-up is affected, I think that's where you start to see early in the season, maybe right at the end of the season, but overall, it's something that teams with the humidity would like to take advantage of in the heat of summer because they know they can get points.
For us, we've asked the league, put us on the road the first 2, 3, 4 weeks of the season because we don't want to have a game at Rio Tinto if there's snow on the ground.
Yeah.
But the league is trying to go to a little more of a competitive parity where they're saying, no, you're going to have to host either March 2nd or March 9th, so which one do you want? And we usually take the latter thinking maybe it'll be 5 degrees warmer, so whatever.
All right, let's squeeze in a quick telephone call before we take our first break. 877-353-9393. is the telephone number. Doug, you're going to lead us off tonight on Frame. Welcome into the program.
You're wet. This is your friend Doug, Mr. Trey.
Dougie, what's up, buddy?
You guys are using big words tonight. I'm having a hard time understanding you.
Did you go to Fullerton for 3 semesters?
Yeah, it's an English major, you know. Hey, I hope Nick Raimondo and Beckman are listening, because as one of your biggest fans, I will tell you, and I'd be curious to hear what your partner has to say, because obviously he's been there, done that. As I watched that game, and I watched, with Beckman the other night, those guys are great players, and Nick made a mistake, but you know what? We're not even in that situation without him. Yep. The mistake he made is no worse than the mistake Grabavoy made, in my opinion. It's athletics, it's the way it goes, and it should never come down to one play anyway. Raimondo, I don't, to me, up until that final 15 seconds, was probably the best game he's played this year. He was in it. I mean, he was just a monster out there, in my opinion. And I hope he's able to shake it, because I got to tell you, he played a great game. It just was that one little moment at the end.
Hey, Doug, good to hear from you. Appreciate the telephone call, and I mean, a lot of good points. And he's absolutely right, Trey. Without Nick Raimondo's heroics during the game, you're not even in a position in extra time for Nick to make.
And like Doug said, we've all watched enough soccer. Like it sometimes games do come down to one play, but in any sport, it's not fair. I mean, there are plays that make a difference, but there's so many opportunities throughout the course of the game. I mean, people point to Fabi had a great chance in alone on Hall early on, and he converts that. Maybe the floodgates open because he was feeling it. So.
It's just a matter of, honestly, it comes down to defenders and goalkeepers are always going to take the most, because when you make mistakes, it's that much more evident as opposed to missing chances.
Yep.
Now I'll tell you, if it was Sabo that missed that chance instead of Nick Grabavoy, everyone would have gone a select few would have gone nuts. But it just goes to show that there is a psychological difference with fans and how you approach when the mistakes are made and where the blame is placed. Because at the end of the day, Jason will tell you, the start and finish of the play itself should have ended with pressure on the ball. Don't let Matt get in behind the defense, because if you got a defender that clears that ball coming in, it's a difference. If Nick doesn't have to come off his line, he doesn't have to react because he sees a breakdown in front of him on 2 separate occasions, then it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think even you could look at the Fabian Espindola chance early on in case of putting Sabo in that position. I mean, it's just interesting how the mind works in certain situations when it comes to this game specifically. We've got a great guest list lined up for you. You're tuned into On Frame. James Russ, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. Coming up on the other side as we hop out to a quick break, Stephen Goff. He's a soccer insider for the Washington Post. Then we'll catch up with Gary Lalas of MLSsoccer.com. He's the editor-in-chief. He'll be right about the top of the hour at 7 o'clock. And then Real Salt Lake's Chris Schuler. Good to see him back on the pitch in Houston. He'll be joining us at about 7:30. Again, you're tuned in to On Frame. Stephen Goff of the Washington Post coming up next right here on ESPN 700.
It's the week we... You are listening to On Frame, brought to you by 4 Home Control, here on the home of RSL Soccer, ESPN 700.
And we welcome you back in On Frame. James Russ, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. Glad to have you in on this stormy Monday night here in the Wasatch Front. Talking RSL, talking Major League Soccer, talking international play as we're kind of into one of those international times of the year. The U.S. Taking on Jamaica tomorrow night. Already played a game a couple days ago where they fell in Jamaica 2-1. Some controversy, and Trey, I guess maybe controversy is not the right word, but Kyle Beckerman for Real Salt Lake kind of taking a beating as he was the man who committed the foul, setting up the first goal really for Jamaica. Maybe a little bit unjust, but really taking a beating from the media.
Well, and I'm going to want to ask Stephen Goff this when we get him on the line here in a second. But, it seemed like, and I unfortunately was not in a home that had DirecTV, therefore I cannot watch the U.S. at Jamaica on beIN Sports. And look, you got to blame the Jamaican Federation for, they give their rights to the highest bidder, and it happened that the highest bidder is a fledgling sports network that's essentially owned by Al Jazeera and taken over all the rights of different leagues that used to be owned by Gold TV, and it's their prerogative. And I have DirecTV, so if I had been at home, I could have watched the game. But anyway, so I'm following the game on Twitter, and Beckerman's just getting absolutely shredded. For I guess he had a giveaway, a few minutes before the goal. He had the foul that led to the goal. He jumped in the wall. The free kick deflected off of his calf, kind of misdirected it, and Tim Howard couldn't recover, and he goes in. And Beckerman's he's a polarizing figure and has been under Klinsmann, because you have this group of media that cover the national team but not MLS. They seem to think they're too good to cover MLS. And so Beckerman, they don't understand why he keeps getting called in, because he doesn't have the pace, he doesn't have some of the things that certain people think you need to have at that level. Then you have, I think, another group that's kind of growing, and these are pretty intense soccer tacticians that love Beckerman because he shields the back four, he plays a quick kind of possession game, ball comes in, he wins the ball, he intercepts a pass, he goes back out, he gets the attack moving the other way. But they were blaming not him, but they're blaming Klinsmann for putting Jones, who is a yellow card waiting to happen, and maybe I'm biased on him because he doesn't play in MLS, and then Maurice Adu, and not setting everybody up to fail. So, Stephen Goff is the kind of the dean of MLS beat writers and American soccer writers who, I think he can maybe help clear the air on some of this controversy surrounding our good friend and our captain, Kyle Beckerman.
Well, let's do that right now. He writes for the Washington Post, and as Trey mentioned, he's been doing it a long time and does a great job. Stephen Goff joining us here in Salt Lake City on Frame. Stephen, appreciate you making time for us.
Hey, it's my pleasure, guys. Any more lightning delays there?
Well, actually, this is not a coincidence that we're having you on. There's a massive lightning storm going on, and we got knocked off the air about 20 minutes ago. So.
Yeah, I'm a jinx.
It's all you, man. Hey, so Steven, I don't know how much of the preamble you kind of heard, but obviously Kyle Beckerman's been blamed for a lot of things regarding Friday night, and I just kind of wanted to get your take on his performance. And it seems like he gets mentioned because he's a active MLS guy, and he's not held in maybe some of the pedigree that the 8 other guys on this call up that have come through MLS.
Well, I've never looked at it as he was at greater fault because, he plays in MLS. I just think Beckerman, Edu, and Jones all played poorly the other night, and as you alluded to, they were kind of set up that way. It's just a baffling lineup decision by Klinsmann. 3 defensive midfielders plus Dempsey in a diamond-shaped midfield, and it didn't work, period. The absence of Michael Bradley is a huge factor. Beckerman did what he could. He was slow reacting on a couple sequences. Let's just face it, he did not have a good game. Either did Jones or Maurice Adu. I thought the back line was okay. The midfield was a problem, and but the problems began with Klinsmann's decision.
But was Kyle being asked to do anything differently than he was in Mexico?
Well, I missed the Mexico game, so it's hard for me to say.
Yeah.
But he was playing a traditional deep midfield role, but the players around him weren't in comfortable positions. Mm-hmm. And Jamaica just flooded the central attack, and Beckerman was outmanned in a lot of situations.
Right.
Jamaica's a very fast, athletic, physical group, and they're playing at home. And they're playing, perhaps the biggest game of their World Cup qualifying cycle in this round. I don't think it's fair to blame one guy. It was an overall poor performance by the U.S., and I think it was a poor coaching performance as well.
Stephen, it's not the first time someone, we in the media or as fans have kind of stepped back and looked at the tactical approach of the U.S. We did it all the time with Bob Bradley, especially towards the end. Now we do it with Jurgen Klinsmann. With Jurgen getting a bit of a freebie for this, first year or so with all the friendlies and putting the team in tough situations to try to find out what kind of group he's got. At what point are there serious concerns about the tactical approach from Jurgen Klinsmann as we head into a qualifying phase that's really unforgiving?
Yeah, right now. I mean, if you look at his body of work, I mean, there have been some extremely impressive friendly victories. The game at Italy earlier this year, and then Mexico last month. They pounded Scotland this summer as well. But in the only 3 games that count that he's coached, 3 World Cup qualifiers in a not very difficult group, this team has been a huge disappointment. I mean, they labored to put away Antigua and Barbuda at home. They didn't close out a lead in Guatemala, settled for a tie. Guatemala's a tough place to play. Marco Papa hit a great free kick. That happens. Okay. But then you go to Jamaica and you have an early lead and your tactics are a mess. Your team just doesn't seem right and you lose. So now you're in a situation where it's 4 days later and you're playing the same team, which is a little different than normally in qualifying. You don't usually play back-to-back games against the same team 5 days apart. So this is a tricky one. And the thing about Jamaica, half their team plays in MLS. They're going to Columbus Crew Stadium. They don't care. They're not intimidated by it. The weather's going to be fine. The field's great. There's nothing that's going to shake Jamaica. As a matter of fact, they're beaming with confidence right now. So, it's not a foregone conclusion the U.S. is going to win this game just because they're at home.
We got the 1-0 win in Mexico. We broke that just terrible streak at Azteca. Yeah. But it's been a while since we've seen Stu Holden. Michael Bradley was injured, unavailable. Landon Donovan the same. Landon, Carlos Bocanegra, Stevie Cherundolo. None of those names or faces in the starting 11. As we continue to judge our growth based on our neighbors to the south and how successful Mexico has been recently, is there some serious concern for the depth of this team when guys like Michael, guys like Landon, guys like Los and Stevie Cherundolo aren't in the team, and it seems as if we don't know what to do with the ball and we don't know who our leader is on the team?
Yeah, it's a very fair point. Donovan and Bradley are, you can make the argument, who are the most important players on the field for the U.S. when at full strength? Donovan, Bradley, Dempsey, Tim Howard. I think those are probably your top 4, right? So, you take Donovan out. Dempsey's not at peak form because he hasn't played much, even though he did score early. That wasn't, you didn't have to be in great form to score that goal the other night. So that's an issue. There's a depth issue, I guess. But again, going back to what we talked about earlier, the decisions, the lineup decisions and the tactical decisions were very strange, and it cost them dearly. And now they're in a situation where not quite must win, but it's pretty close because you're going to have to assume Guatemala is going to win and at worst get a tie at Antigua tomorrow. And it's just so bizarre that we're at this early stage of World Cup qualifying and U.S. fans are rooting for Antigua and Barbuda to get a result to help the U.S. team. It's just surreal right now, and tomorrow we're gonna learn a lot more.
Stephen Goff of the Washington Post with us here in Salt Lake City on Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald. So, Stephen, what has to be different specifically for this U.S. team tomorrow? versus the Jamaicans, who, as you've mentioned, they're not scared coming to Columbus Crew Stadium. It's not anything out of the ordinary for them to be playing there. So what needs to change specifically with the U.S. club to, it's not a must-win like you said, but 3 points would be very nice.
Yeah, you got to take care of points at home. What do they have to do better? They have to have clearer ideas of what they want to do and hold possession better. I think we're going to see Bocanegra back in the lineup, especially since Goodson's suspended. Cherundolo seems to be okay from what I've heard, although Parkhurst wasn't bad the other night. But again, there's your leadership. I mean, Bocanegra and Cherundolo, between the two of them, have 160, 70 caps, whatever it is. So that's important to have them out there. Dempsey should be a little sharper now after getting a full match the other day. So, they have to have a plan. They have to execute it and get better performances from whomever is in the midfield.
Stephen, one thing that Andy Williams and I were talking about yesterday, we were laughing about just about how the office in Jamaica and how when people go there for the first time, media and fans included, they can't believe as they walk into the stadium that there's about 36-foot-tall speakers. There's a cloud of haze hovering above the field by about just over 20 feet. And you've got a hype man that rolls in a white Cadillac Escalade with 25-inch rims, and the place goes nuts. I can tell you from being on that field before a game and at halftime, it's a pretty surreal environment to be a part of. What was it like down there for you?
Yeah, I mean, this was my fourth time covering a game there, and it's a fun place. I mean, you have to understand that it's just the Caribbean culture. People are generally happy. Even when you're losing after 35 seconds, they're irritated, but they're happy. That's their nature. You go to El Salvador or Costa Rica, it's not the same. So in Jamaica, people are, it's just a different atmosphere, and they're excited for the team, and it's very loud. The Vuvuzelas were out. It's not an intimidating place by any means. I mean, the fans are actually quite a ways from the field because there's a running track and an old velodrome for bicycle racing. So, it's a unique place, and Caribbean venues are generally more a more lively place to be than just the intensity and the anger and the bitterness that you often encounter in these Central American location.
Well, breaking your focus for just a quick second and bringing it back to Major League Soccer. Eastern Conference, 11 points separating first through seventh. It looks as if FC Dallas isn't going to be able to catch Vancouver for that last spot in the Western Conference unless Vancouver continues to just implode on itself. What in your opinion, will be the biggest surprise as we head into the playoffs in Major League Soccer?
Ooh, what's going to be the biggest surprise? Well, getting back to Columbus, I mean, the crew has been awfully good lately with Higuain in there. That's a team capable of making a late regular season run and stunning some teams. Biggest surprise, boy. I mean, Los Angeles, they're not as good as they were last year, but with Donovan and Keane and their other attacking elements, Beckham, you just have this feeling that they could knock off a higher seeded team in the playoffs. I love Kansas City. I mean, I just love the way they play. I love the balance in the lineup. I think they're hungry after falling a little short last year. So I think Kansas City is the best team in the East. I think they're better than New York, and Chicago and Houston have been good at times this year as well, but I think Kansas City has been the most consistent.
Steven,
and out west, I mean, there's so many quality teams. San Jose is looking for that supporter shield. Salt Lake has a quality and experienced team, and then you got Seattle. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun in the playoffs this year. It's going to be very unpredictable. And I don't know. I think we're going to see some surprises, specifically what they are. I don't know. I don't know what they are. Maybe DC United rallies and gets their act together because right now they're struggling.
You think San Jose's penchant for scoring all their goals in the final 30 minutes of games can sustain itself throughout the playoffs?
I think they score all their goals in the 8th minute of added time.
There you go.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of a magical season for San Jose. You know, I don't think anyone really anticipated this. And, you know, they're the favorites at the moment. And a lot of things are working in their favor. Come playoff time, who knows? I mean, you get into these 1 and 2 game series and anything can really happen. And then down the road, they might have a situation where San Jose might not even be able to play at home if they make it to the final because of the small season capacity there.
Hey, Stephen, we appreciate you stopping by and making time for us. Give him a follow at Soccer Insider on Twitter. He's Stephen Goff of the Washington Post. We really appreciate it, Stephen.
Yeah, man, my pleasure, guys.
Steve, we'll talk to you during the playoffs.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
All right, there you go, Stephen Goff, as we mentioned, of the Washington Post. Appreciate him. Good stuff, as Trey mentioned early on. This guy's been around MLS and doing this for a long time, covering soccer. He knows what he's doing and does a great job. We appreciate him. You can check out that interview shortly up on the website at ESPN700sports.com. But we got to take a quick break. You're tuned into On Frame. On the other side, we'll kind of run down the international play as far as the Real Salt Lake players who were involved, to kind of bring you up to speed on that. This is On Frame on ESPN 700.
Monday. This is On Frame, brought to you by 4 Home Control. If you want to reach the show, dial 877-353-0700 right now on ESPN 700.
And welcome back in On Frame, 6:45 on a Monday. James Russ, Trey Fitz-Gerald, Brian Dunseth with you, talking soccer. And as there's international games and things going on, the U.S. will be back in action tomorrow night in Columbus for that back-to-back game, really, with Jamaica needing to rebound from the 2-1 loss in Jamaica. And, guys, let's talk about the RSL players who are representing Real Salt Lake in international play. Obviously, we kind of touched on Kyle Beckerman a little bit with our last guest, Stephen Goff of the Washington Post. But, Trey, kind of give us a rundown, just a recap on RSL guys and their action in international play.
Friday night, Will Johnson started for Canada, played 72 minutes. They won 1-0 at home against Panama. The Canadian team went back down. They're going to play that game tomorrow night in the stadium where we will play Toro a week from tomorrow. They're expecting 30,000 at the National Stadium. But Will Johnson, because he got a yellow card just minutes before the goal Friday night, he's actually flown home. He's going to train with RSL for a few days starting tomorrow.
Because he'll be on yellow card suspension with Canada. Is that correct?
That is correct. He's got to serve a suspension. So, and he's a big part of that team. Stephen Hart, the manager for Canada, has started him every game in and out. And then another big Canadian, Olivier Ocean, is out with a knee injury. So they've got their hands full, but they feel like they're going to, if they can win tomorrow, they'll progress to the hexagonal for the first time in a long time for Canada.
Yeah, and to put this in perspective, in Group C, it's Canada, Panama, Honduras, and Cuba. Everyone knows Cuba would come in dead last, but there isn't an expert out there that thought that Canada would be leading the group at this point. 7 points. 2 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw. They're the only team that's undefeated in Group C play so far. And you think about Panama and Honduras and how dangerous they've been recently, how good Panama was in the Gold Cup last time around, guys like Blas Perez and company. I mean, you think about Honduras and how many players that have gone over to England and playing in the Premiership. Henry Thomas just signing with the Colorado Rapids. So right now, this is a huge, huge opportunity for Canada because a lot of people thought that they would not even make it out of this round to advance to the second. And right now, undefeated, top of their group.
And then Alvaro Saborio played the full 90 for Costa Rica at home against Mexico last Friday. They lost 2-0. Mexico, I was talking to Jason Kreis about this on Friday night, and he just says, look, they're head and shoulders above everybody else in our confederation right now, and it was a pretty dominant performance for them.
Yeah.
Sabo played well, but Costa Rica just didn't have a lot of the ball. So big game for him tomorrow in Mexico. Then he'll rejoin us before we head down and play Toro a week from tomorrow night.
Yeah, and Sabo, 4 goals in 3 games. He had the hat trick against Guyana, however they're pronouncing it nowadays. But the big problem with Costa Rica is 2-2 at home against El Salvador. Then they lose 2-0 at home against Mexico. And you got to think it's going to be another 3 points in the bag. Right now, Mexico 3 wins, 0 losses, 3 draws. They've given up just 2 goals. Plus 5 differentials.
So Costa Rica is going to lose tomorrow, and then they got to win basically both of their remaining games to try to get through.
The big game is going to be in El Salvador, and that's going to be second week of October. So they'll play in Mexico, then they have to go to El Salvador, and then they're at home. So it's going to be a tough, tricky little situation. You got to think though, Costa Rica, El Salvador. You would think that Costa Rica would be the second team through behind Mexico. That being said, you look at Canada's group, and you'd be surprised to see Honduras out of qualifying as of this point.
Now let's talk a little bit about the U.S. I mean, we hit on Kyle Beckerman, but this group, and it seems like the Jurgen Klinsmann era is a bit of a roller coaster, is kind of how I'm seeing it. It just up and down. It seems like they'll have a good outing, and then things kind of just interesting with how he's piecing things together. And as Stephen alluded to, Dunny, the lineup was an interesting one in Jamaica. And just what do you make of the Jurgen Klinsmann era so far, and kind of what he's trying to do with this team? Is it he's setting some stepping stones, or what do you make out of what he's doing?
Well, I think there was 2 objectives. I think the first objective was to make the United States a better possession-oriented team while still winning. Bob Bradley proved that he could get results. They were ugly results at times, but he could still get results. And if you look at now under Jurgen Klinsmann, we've got big wins in Italy and in Mexico. And it's not for the style that we played. It was some incredible goalkeeping by Timmy Howard and, some timely tap-in opportunities that led to these friendly wins that really amount to nothing. Jurgen Klinsmann is going to be judged on his team performance in qualifying. And if he were to be judged today, it would be tough to give him a passing grade, because the comparison is him versus Bob Bradley and Bruce Arena. There's a lot of fanfare amongst Jurgen based on his time as a player, his time as a head coach for Germany, and the run that they had in 06. He had a short-lived stint with Bayern Munich that didn't go well. He came under the pressure of players talking about his tactics or lack of tactics. And now, you look back at this lineup, and you've got Timmy Howard in goal, Fabian Johnson at left back, Jeff Cameron, who really never had a role in the U.S. Now that he's with Stoke City, he gets the start. Clarence Goodson, Gooch and Lowe, Timmy and Carlos Bocanegra have been the starters. So Jeff Cameron and Clarence Goodson are your starting backs. And then you have at right back Michael Parkhurst. They're just interchangeable names. None of these guys are going to be real starters. These aren't the guys that you want to see, no disrespect, in a U.S. uniform when it comes down to lining up in a World Cup. Our biggest problem here in the United States is we're not really battle-tested when it goes through qualifying. We're not in England. We're not in Europe. We're not facing Italy on the road. We're not going to Portugal. We're not facing England at Wembley. This is pretty easy qualifying, and it's one of the reasons why CONCACAF adjusted the qualifying scenario, knowing that Mexico and the United States were going to be the 2 teams through. So, we'll see what happens. It's a huge test. It's a huge test for Jurgen Klinsmann, and the pressure's on to see what kind of formation he's going to put out with what faces, what names, and what positions. Because we were talking about with Steven, no Michael Bradley, he's injured. Landon Donovan played 45 minutes, I think, for the reserves for LA today in a 4-0 win. He got an assist. Carlos Bocanegra was left on the bench. I know there's trials and tribulations with his time at Rangers, even though he was still playing for Rangers before he moved to Racing Santander. And Stevie Cherundolo didn't play as well. So I think we're all going to sit back and watch, and the pressure now is on Jurgen to not just talk about what he wants to achieve, but to have the team prove that they can do what he wants to achieve.
If they lose tomorrow, if the U.S. loses tomorrow, what does that mean for Sunil Gulati? I mean, Jurgen's his handpicked guy. He chased him for a decade.
Yeah, in terms of pressure.
Coach.
That's a good question.
And if they don't even get to the hacks, what does that mean?
Wait, you look at the games left. So Antigua and Barbuda, they held Jamaica 0-0 at home. So after the United States hosts Jamaica tomorrow at Cruz Stadium, on October 12th, the U.S. goes down to Antigua and Barbuda. Guatemala plays host to Jamaica. Then, 4 days later, the United States is at Livestrong Sporting Park against Guatemala. Now, it's going to get tricky. Should the U.S. not get 3 points, it's going to be we're going to see a lot of news stories coming in on Wednesday morning that are going to be really, really ugly because everybody called for Bob Bradley's head.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a single major media outlet that did not ask for him to be fired following the performance in the Gold Cup, even though they made it all the way to the finals and they ended up losing to Mexico. And if you go back to that one game, Clint Dempsey's header that was saved off the line could have been the difference between a win and an eventual loss. But the pressure's on. And Jurgen is a great guy. He is a great human being. There's no doubt about that. You cannot argue with his pedigree. You cannot argue with the success he had with Germany. But we don't have the depth that Germany has. We don't have the pipeline that Germany has. We don't have the cultural history and soccer history that Germany has. So now you're starting a completely different scenario in the United States. What he's done at the youth levels, amazing. 10-month season, development academy, identifying coaches, setting a philosophy, setting a script top to bottom that will be used in terms of how to coach your teams throughout the course of a season. Awesome. Identifying. Awesome. But the final product is qualifying for a World Cup and qualifying confidently in a World Cup.
Yeah, results are a must, and that's what everyone's kind of waiting to see. He's had a couple good ones, but the consistency, I think, is what needs to be brought with Team USA, especially in this Jurgen Klinsmann era. We're going to top out to a quick break. You're tuned into On Frame. James Russ, Brian Dunseth, and Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. Back with more right here on ESPN 700.
Jurgen's. You're listening to On Frame, the Soccer Insider Show. To join the program, call 877-353-0700. Now back to the boys on ESPN 700.
And welcome back in. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. This is On Frame. We're just a couple minutes shy of 7 o'clock. Coming up at 7 o'clock, or just after, Greg Lalas of MLSsoccer.com. He's the editor-in-chief. And then at the bottom of the hour, Chris Schuler of Real Salt Lake. Guys, we were talking during the break, and we were talking about the U.S. Men's national team. They got the early goal versus Jamaica. They had 3 holding midfielders, which, for me, tactically, it sounds like, okay, you're a goal up and you got 3 holding midfielders. You should be able to at least get that 1-0 victory. Why didn't it happen?
Well, and I think we talked about, with Jurgen, we were promised style and substance and wins and a different look than what we've ever seen in the U.S. The fluidity with the ball in possession. It's what we did not see. And yes, 2 goals were given up off free kicks. The deflection off Kyle and just a banger of a free kick that beat Timmy Howard. Nothing he could do. That being said, it was the style in which, or the lack of style in which the U.S. lost. We didn't see any type of possession. We didn't see the type of possession that we're used to seeing. And for Jamaica, with the speed and athleticism that they have and the numbers they were committing forward, we looked like we were just defending as opposed to playing. Sometimes we created some decent opportunities, but we never saw that one player that wanted the ball that really took over. And I think that's something that has to happen. It's got to be different tomorrow night. And you got to hope home field advantage, being back in the United States, and a chip on their shoulder short around recovery time, that would be the difference.
Hour 1 is in the books. Coming up on the other side, we'll talk with MLSsoccer.com's Greg Lalas. You're tuned in to On Frame right here on ESPN 700.
Back to more soccer conversation on Frame here on your home of RSL, ESPN 700.
And welcome in. 5 minutes after 7 o'clock. This is On Frame. James Russ, Trey Fitz-Gerald, Brian Dunseth. Make note, this is Monday night. This is our new time slot, Monday night, 6
to 8
o'clock.
Slot, but we're back.
I guess that's the better way to put it. The old time slot. We have returned We have returned no longer on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever other day we may have landed on. Monday nights moving forward, 6 to 8 o'clock, right here on ESPN 700. We've got an hour left, and it's a good hour. We've got Greg Lalas that we'll get to here in just a second, and then coming up at about 7:30, Real Salt Lake defender Chris Schuler will be joining us. But out to the phones we go to welcome in our next guest. He is Greg Lalas of MLSsoccer.com. He's the editor-in-chief. And, Greg, we appreciate you making time for us here in Salt Lake City.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on the show, and I also appreciate coming into a little bit of Alice in Chains rock and roll.
There you go.
Just for you.
You're lying, but thank you very much. And by the way, Monday night is a much better time slot than any other night.
Absolutely.
It's Trey's fault.
So Greg, I know you're already in Columbus. You've been there for a couple days getting ready for the game tomorrow. We had Stephen Goff on about a half hour ago. Give us your assessment of Jurgen Klinsmann's situation, the extreme blame that has come at the feet of Kyle Beckerman for the result the other night, and any other thoughts you have on this huge game tomorrow night.
Well, I think that right now everyone's a little bit... from what I've talked to the players and what I've heard from Jurgen Klinsmann, they're frustrated from the result from Friday night, obviously, and they know the pressure is on. They know they have to get a win in this one, or otherwise, as Josie Altidore said, they're in a really scary place. Regarding Friday night's performance, basically, Klinsmann was very, very succinct about it. He said, we gave up cheap free kicks and they scored them. Now, Beckerman obviously was the one that gave the first foul, but people aren't talking about what Maurice Adu gave away the second foul that led to that free kick. Whatever. The deflection on the wall, throw that away. That can happen in so many different times. That's just a question of misfortune on Kyle's part that it came right after giving up the foul. So, I think Beckerman is expected to do what he does best, and that's sit in that hole, fill in the space in the middle, and play the ball quickly when he gets it to the guys who have a little bit more of the attacking skill to go forward. The problem, I think, on that night was the other guys in the midfield are too similar.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have that guy to get the ball and just give it to and say, okay, whether it's Landon, whether it's someone else, whether even it's Torres, who we all know has not been playing very well. But you can get the ball to him quickly and say, all right, you do what you got to do. I'm just going to sit here and do what I do to fill in this space.
Greg, does Kyle, and this question's always going to sound like a homer because we're covering Real Salt Lake, but does Kyle fall into a category where he'll get a majority of the blame because he's the only player on that squad right now in that starting 11 that is playing in Major League Soccer and that is not playing overseas?
Man, I hope not, because I think that if Klinsmann has the faith in him, then I think everybody else should have the faith in him. I mean, when Jermaine Jones first joined the national team, he didn't exactly look like a world beater. And, Michael Parkhurst had, I thought, probably the best game of anyone on the U.S. team down in Jamaica. And he's playing in Denmark. Now, granted, it's a Champions League team in Denmark, but it's still, I don't know, Donnie, you played in Scandinavia. You know whether it's, better or worse than MLS, but I'd argue that right now it's certainly not better than MLS. And I think this is one of those situations, and Donnie, I agree with you. I think there is a little bit of a bias. We're almost harder on our guys in MLS than we should be than everybody else.
Greg, I have a theory here, and it may be whiny homerism as Donnie alluded to, but I feel like there's a growing clique of U.S. media that only cover the national team. They do not cover MLS, and they are continually surprised that a guy like Kyle gets called in, and they don't credit the other 10 guys on the roster that came through MLS and are now playing elsewhere. And it's kind of what you were just talking about. They're harder on their own in such a way, but you don't see it from the Stephen Goffs and the Michael Lewises and some of those guys, but you do see it from maybe a guy like John Godfrey and some of the others that cover the national team. Ron Blum's another one that comes to mind. I don't know how that theory sounds to you.
Well, I think it's a good theory. Because if you're not watching MLS on a regular basis, you're not seeing the improvement in the play over the last couple of years in particular. And by the way, Jeff Cameron's an MLS guy still. I'm sorry, but 2 games for Stoke or 3 games for Stoke do not make you, Clint Dempsey you could say is a little bit of a mishmash between the two, but Jeff Cameron is very much an MLS guy still at this point in terms of his development of his abilities. And when Breck Shea comes on the field and is very good against Mexico, right? Is that in spite of him being in MLS? Maybe it's because he's in MLS actually that he's able to do that and perform at that level. But I think it's unfortunate, and actually, you talked about the media. Sorry about the noise, guys. I'm actually out on the streets here of me in Columbus, so you can probably hear a siren.
Sonny knows those sirens well.
My second home.
So I think that there's also the fact that there's so much social media out there. So you have all of these voices out there from fans or sort of, I don't know what the best word would be, sort of like independent journalists who, on Twitter in particular, the point is to be as vociferous as possible about your opinion. Mm-hmm. And regardless of whether, you know who this person is on Twitter, whether you have read other things they've said, and whether you know if they're a credible voice or not, it all adds up into this din that can start to shift the conversation in ways that in the old days, let's say, it didn't happen. And, you guys know I'm a big fan of social media. I love Twitter. I'm on it myself and all that. But there is a sort of a mob mentality sometimes that I think comes out of the Twitter world in particular, and it seeps into just the general conversation in a way that I think can be dangerous.
Great.
One of those mob mentalities is this sort of, we're very hard on MLS.
It's funny, you bring up a fantastic point. I liken today's Twitter usage in soccer terms around game time to what big soccer was, say back in the late 90s and maybe the early 2000s, where it was gospel written through fingertips, and if you didn't catch the game, you would think, oh my God, Kyle Beckman was the worst player on the field, just based on some of these reports coming through. And I always have found that interesting, and this is something that, because of your playing experience and being from the media perspective, but also being an analyst as well for television, back in your days with the New England Revolution, I thought something was pretty interesting that was said when Kyle was subbed out in favor of Danny Williams. And I've always said this, and just my own personal feeling is that when a play-by-play announcer makes a statement based on his opinion of the game, it kind of gets shady. It gets into this gray area where Phil Shane makes a comment that here's Danny Williams and his athleticism and his speed, and out goes Kyle Beckerman, who doesn't have it, and around that effect. That's what I took away, was Kyle was the slowest player on the field, and here comes the most athletic player on the field.
I don't have a problem with Phil stating that as a fact in some way, where he's saying, I'm just factually telling you that Danny Williams is a very fast guy and he's athletic. The real question that has to be asked is that what Jurgen Klinsmann wanted? Did he put him, and this is where the analyst needs to get involved and say, all right, well, maybe this extra bit of speed will be helpful. Because ultimately, Jurgen Klinsmann is the one saying that Kyle Beckerman, you're the guy. What you do, regardless of speed or athleticism or whatever, is what we need. So go do it. And I think ultimately that needs to be respected more than it is.
Greg, if the United States does not get 3 points against Jamaica tomorrow night, what are the headlines that we'll be seeing surrounding Jurgen Klinsmann and the short amount of time he's been the head coach of the U.S. men's national team?
Oof, what are the headlines? I don't know. I mean, if you're talking about a truly sort of established journalist saying it, I think it will be now the pressure is really on, and you're going to need some luck. I think that some of the rhetoric that will be coming out of the general public will be some of the things I've already seen, i.e., does the Federation have Bruce Arena's phone number on speed dial ready to go if something goes wrong? I don't know. I'm a firm believer in you dance to the date that brung you, and we brought Jurgen Klinsmann to this dance, and you got to ride it out. for better or worse, ultimately. And so if they don't get a win, I think the headlines are going to be that this is teetering on the brink of probably the largest failure in U.S. soccer history, ultimately. This is bigger than the failure of 1998 when they struggled so mightily. If they were not to get to the hex, I mean, whew, you got me all riled up now. I'm depressed, guys. Come on. This can't happen, ultimately. It just can't happen. And so I think the headlines will be all about pressure. There will be talk of failure. I think there will be suggestions about making a change. I think those are what the headlines will be.
Greg Lalas is our guest. He's editor-in-chief at MLSsoccer.com. Greg, let's turn our attention now to MLS play. We're kind of into the final stretch of the regular season. Real Salt Lake, that's our attention here, obviously, in Salt Lake City through 29 games played, clinging to that third spot in the West with 46 points. What do you make of the Western Conference playoff race? And if I was to have you look into your crystal ball, how do you see things shaping up out West when the end of the regular season hits?
Well, if I were to look at the five, I would say that right now the scariest team in the West is probably the LA Galaxy. They're starting, and that's the scary part is that they're not even on all cylinders. They're starting to get all cylinders working. They very rarely seem to have all of their big guns in. They very rarely seem to have everybody healthy. But they're still grinding out wins and points. So I think that they are probably the biggest threat to anyone in the Western Conference. San Jose, they have the whole package right now. They have a guy who can score up top. They have some incredible, strong defense in the back. Bernardez has been a wonderful addition for all of us, I think, to just watch. Dunny, you and I probably sit there and marvel at what he does on a regular basis. And Seattle, I mean, who knows? Can they handle it when the pressure's on in the playoffs? That's the biggest question about Seattle. How will they do in the playoffs? I'm not convinced about Vancouver in any way, shape, or form. Who else is in there? And I like Dallas. If they can start to put a run together a little bit, they are going to be fun, especially with David Ferreira healthy. Am I missing someone? Okay.
That's about
my Chivas are done, so whatever.
What about Real Salt Lake there, Greg?
Well, I didn't touch on Real Salt Lake because what I like about patience, I got to build the drama.
There you go.
So what I like about RSL actually is that they're not overwhelming anyone. They are quietly going about their business. And it seems like over the last couple of years, it's been a lot of sort of screaming from the rooftops about how great RSL is and the system that works. And this year, it seems to have sort of come down a little bit in terms of the volume of that. And I actually think that bodes well in the long run because people aren't sure if this is still the same old Real Salt Lake they saw in 2010 that seems to steamroll a lot of people during the season, and yet there is still that core that we've always seen over the last couple of years, and I think that makes them actually particularly dangerous because from a mental standpoint, they're almost a surprise package, oddly enough.
Greg, you're a part of something that I've been a huge fan of for years, and that's Kicking and Screaming Soccer Film Festival. You guys are about to do one in Portland, September 13th and 14th, and in London, September 28th to October 4th. Tell us a little bit, tell the people in Salt Lake City a little bit more about Kicking and Screening and how this all came about, because it's just an incredible idea that you guys have put to use.
Well, it came about because of a horribly failed blind date. I went out with a woman in New York. I was set up with a friend who said, well, she's pretty and she likes soccer. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went on a date. And she told me that she had tried to put together this same festival in London when she was living over there, and it was canceled at the last minute. So I said, well, let's do it here in New York. And if we have to just get 20 people in the living room, we can call it a film festival, we'll do it. And that was in 2009. And we have now since done about 10 festivals around the world, London, Amsterdam, India. We've done them in the States a lot. We've done them in Houston, Washington, 4 years in New York. and now our first one in the Pacific Northwest up in Portland this week. It's awesome. It's a lot of fun. I lose a lot of money on it each year, but it's a lot of fun anyway.
Well, Greg, Dunny and I would love to have you come out and do something post-Sundance, maybe to kick off our season next year.
We are in. You name it, we'll put it together, and we'll definitely come.
Garth Lagerwey actually has a producer credit on a Sundance film from a few years ago about the Homeless World Cup. So he's got some connections. We've had some interaction with the Sundance folks over the years. I think that'd be something very exciting for all the soccer fans and film enthusiasts here in Utah.
That would be great, but you guys have to agree to be on some of the, we always have panel discussions and stuff, so you guys have to agree to be on that stuff.
It's always hard to get Dunny to talk on this thing.
Great. I know. This guy with a microphone? Are you kidding me? He's had both hands on it the entire show since we started an hour and a half ago.
Love it. Yeah, we'll definitely come to Salt Lake.
Hey, Greg, we appreciate you making time for us here on Frame. Great work, you and your staff there at MLSsoccer.com. We'll catch up with you again real soon.
Thanks very much, guys. Good luck the rest of the season.
Thanks,
all right.
Greg. Thanks, Greg. There you go. Greg Lalas, editor-in-chief at MLSsoccer.com. It's interesting. I always like to get their take on this Western Conference playoff race, try to get a better grasp on where the national sites have Real Salt Lake and really the Western Conference shaping up. And the scary thing, and I think a lot of people probably feel this way, and quickly before break, the LA Galaxy, this is a team that I think we're all keeping our eye on because they're the team chasing Real Salt Lake at this point, 43 points through 28 games played. So they've got the one game in hand. Basically, the records are exactly the same for RSL and the LA Galaxy. Obviously, the one downside in the win column, RSL 14-11-4, LA 13-11-4. But this is a team that, as Greg said, just starting to put things together.
Well, no, it's been a while. I mean, you go back to that come-from-behind win here at Rio Tinto Stadium, and that was the changing point. We talked about this last week.
Right.
Mike McGee told me publicly on NBC that was the game at halftime where Landon got a goal. They were down 2-1, and they felt like after that going down 2-0 and on the road, everyone was throwing their hands up. And that one play by Landon was special enough to just completely change their year. And not to rub it in RSL fans' face, but that's the scary thing. If you think about how bad the LA Galaxy was in June, July.
But that was our tipping point going the other way, too.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, it just shows you all that buffer and everything that RSL had, how quickly you can catch up in this league and the runs that you can put together. And I think the Seattle Sounders are another perfect example. They rattle off 5 wins in 15 days, and then they go 9 games without a single result.
Yeah.
And it's frightening, and that's Major League Soccer. And I think that's the scary part now, knowing that you've got 5-6 games left for certain teams, and depending on the run you can put heading into the playoffs, it'll be frightening to see some of the teams that really start to get going, because there's certain teams in this league you don't want to play already, but then you don't want to play the team that's hot,
right?
Because the confident hot team comes in and they don't care. They've got no worries.
Well, and this league, it seems like, and to your point, streakiness is kind of the word that comes to mind for me, streakiness in this league. Because, I mean, even if you look at FC Dallas, this team, it appears, is likely going to be on the outside looking in at this point when the season comes to an end. But this is a team that endured, I believe, a 13-game winless streak in the middle of their season. And so, I mean, you look at what Real Salt Lake, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Sure.
Obviously, the road results haven't been there. But looking even at seasons past, if you can get things put together and get everyone on the same page come the end of October, anything can happen.
Well, the thing I keep going back to is in 2010, we were rolling through everybody. And even that last game of the year in Colorado, you're down 2-0 in stoppage time. You scrape together 2 goals. You end the season on this 16-game unbeaten run. But, man, we were out of gas. And you saw that in that first round of the playoffs. You know, Javi gets the red. We kind of waste a 7th-minute goal by Fabian and lose that series to Dallas. We were just out of gas completely. What I'm hoping this year is that we right the ship in CONCACAF. We have a must-win game next Tuesday to even have a hope of winning that group. And I feel like based on the last 5 performances where we don't have very many points to show for it, the form is getting better. The performances are getting better. The defense is certainly there. And I know after we talk to Chris Schuler, we'll talk a little bit about where the goal is going to come from in these final 7 games of the season, 2 CONCACAF, 5 MLS. But the hope is that we can be peaking and avoid that wild card, but be peaking when you have to play, 4 games in, 15 days in order to earn a spot in MLS Cup.
Yeah, Jason Kreis has alluded to the fact that guys may be burned out in the playoff race. They're looking to avoid that this year because it will be a grueling playoff run for whatever team hoists the MLS Cup come December the 1st. You're tuned in to On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, and Trey Fitz-Gerald. We're going to hop out to a quick break, but on the other side, we catch up with RSL defenseman Chris Schuler. Good to see him back on the pitch as Real Salt Lake was in Houston. We'll get his thoughts on the team moving forward, getting ready for the playoffs. That comes up next right here on ESPN 700.
You are listening to On Frame, brought to you by 4 Home Control, here on the home of RSL Soccer, ESPN 700.
And we welcome you back in On Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. We've got about 30 minutes left, and a lot of RSL talk coming up here in the next half hour. We got to get to CONCACAF. We got to get to the final stretch run for Real Salt Lake in MLS play. And joining us now is RSL defenseman Chris Schuler, who it was great to see back on the pitch despite the result in Houston this past week. But Chris, appreciate you joining us. Just first things first, how did it feel to be back out on the pitch, man?
It felt really good. I've been watching soccer for a long time, and I enjoy playing it a lot more.
Smart man.
Chris, your last appearance back in mid-May was 70 minutes at left back off the bench for Wingard. I think he did his hamstring on the turf in Seattle. You play that game. It maybe exacerbates the bone in your foot. Talk a little bit about how frustrating it was all summer and then kind of coming full circle and playing 90 strong minutes at left back in Houston the other night.
Well, I guess the hardest part was it just started off with something, really small. I didn't expect to be out for 3 months at all. At the beginning, it was one of those things where you just take a little time, take a few weeks, and you'll be back strong. And all of a sudden, it's September, and I still haven't played yet. But it was a lot of fun to be out there a few days ago in Houston. I've been, like I said, watching a lot of soccer, which is tough sometimes. The way I got through was just taking it one day at a time. I did have to separate myself a little bit while at the same time doing what I felt like I had to do to make my recovery as fast as it could be. So it was really gratifying. Obviously, it would have been better if we could have, gotten out there with a point at least. But you know what? In the end of the day, it was like I said, it was a lot of fun to be out there. I really enjoyed myself, even though I am out of position a little bit.
Chris, you and I have had plenty of conversations. Watching you at training, off on your own, doing your fitness, on the bike, doing everything that you said that you had to do. How do you go about personally separating what that physical injury is while still dealing with the psychological barrier that comes along with it?
Well, I would say, I don't know if this would work for everybody, but for me, you do have to get away from the game a little bit. I was making sure that I was doing everything I felt like I needed to do with the doctors and the trainers told me I could do to, keep my fitness up because, that's probably one of the most important parts. It's like the building block of the game. You got to have your fitness right. So I'll do that. On the other hand, I'd go to the locker room and do, get a lift, get a run, get a swim. But then, I had to get away from the game a little bit because I just personally put so much stake into how the team's doing, and it's just tough when you feel like you're kind of, feel like you have a lot less worth, just could not being able to, do your job essentially. But like I said, at the same time, you still try to do what you can, what you're capable of doing. So my strategy was, take it a day at a time, get my workout in, but then, just try to keep moving forward every day.
It's one thing to work on your fitness on your own. It's another thing to get your fitness in training. But when you're playing a left back in Houston with that type of humidity, how do you go about preparing knowing that it's going to be an incredible, difficult game to deal with?
Houston presents a lot of unique challenges as far as the climate in that new stadium. It's it's a good situation for them. You know, it's tough to go and step in there. But as far as left back goes for me, and my teammates around me help me out a lot because they know I'm out of position. So I'm not expected to be the attacking left back that we usually see out of Tony or Wingert or Kenny when they're in there. You know, it's definitely a little bit more of a defensive spot when I'm out there, but I still just try to, in preparing for the game against Houston, I definitely watch, you know, I've been watching games all season, obviously, but, you know, I'll rewatch some games and just try to incorporate some of the things that I see Tony and Wing do really well. I mean, some of those major things being we just put a premium on the ball, you know. Those guys don't give up the ball a lot. So every time I got it, I was trying to make the right pass, but at the same time trying to make the pass that had a high percentage of completion because you don't want to get caught on the ball in that position, you know. And there's just a few things like that I feel like helped me out a lot.
So, Chris, you guys got a reserve game in Kansas City tomorrow morning. Tuesday morning, and then a week from Tuesday, back to CONCACAF action, and really a must-win game down in Panama. Kind of what's your mentality, and how do you feel the whole team's mentality in the locker room is going into these final 5 regular season games and 2 CONCACAF games before the playoffs?
Well, right now, you know, we got to KC a few hours ago, so I got to went over to Gordon Bierce, got a good meal in, and just approach it like any other game. You know, go out there and try to do your best and help out the guys around you as they do the same for you. So this reserve game, you know, just try to get the most out of it that we can. But then we got, you know, like you said, towards the end of the season, and we've got a really big CONCACAF game coming up. But before that, we do have a little bit of time. So, I mean, all the guys on the team have faith in the team. That's probably one of our strongest aspects. We believe in each other, so take these next few days in preparation to go down there and get the results.
Hey, Chris, and Chris Schuler joining us here on Frame, RSL defender. As we're into the final stretch of the regular season, Chris, and then as Trey alluded to, this CONCACAF game a week from tomorrow night is a must-win. So points at this point are at a premium. How are you guys able to really keep your focus on the games that are at hand? Meaning, you've got the huge CONCACAF game, but then you've got to be extremely focused for these last 5 MLS games as you're approaching the playoffs. How difficult is it for you as a player to bounce in and out of different competitions?
From the personal aspect, I break it down. I mean, it's a lot simpler, you know. So when you present in a certain way, it can seem like there's a lot going on, but, you know, I try to take it, when I was hurt, I took it one day at a time, and since I'm healthy, we'll take it one game at a time, you know. We just prepare for every game like it's our last, and we do know it's the end of the season, so you start paying attention to the small details, and like you said, points are at a premium, and everyone knows what's at stake, you know, but I think the easiest thing for me to do, and I think a lot of the guys feel the same way, is you take it one game at a time.
Chris, one thing that a lot of guys talk about when they see an extended layoff from the game is how much they enjoy it, how much they missed it, and how much they find themselves kind of falling back in love with the game. When you were out for the amount of time you were, close to 4 months, what did you take away from not only sitting back and watching this team, but what did you learn about yourself?
One thing I do, like you said, you kind of fall back in love with it. One thing I learned that, you know, unfortunately I had to relearn a few times is how much I really do enjoy just playing, you know. Before you're out there, like, there's always questions. You never know how it's going to go. But once the whistle blows and you step across the white line, that's when it, you know, you feel cool. I personally feel a little bit more comfortable, you know. You realize that you've been here before. You know, you know what you're out here doing. I mean, I just really, really enjoy playing the actual game, you know. Practice is all good, you know, we got lifts, we got run, you got to take care of your diet, you got to eat the right food and get the right amount of sleep, but that all culminates for me when the whistle blows and you actually get to play the game, and that's what I figured out I missed the most, and then, like I said, it felt good to be back out there.
Chris, from a player's perspective, you know, all this talk around the team and where the goal is going to come from, how do you get the results, you know you're getting in those final last couple games before you make it into the playoffs and trying to get those top 2 spots in the West. What's the talking point in the team between the players of the situation, what it is now, and what you're trying to accomplish over these next couple of weeks?
Well, the next few weeks, you know, we just try to go out there and do the best that we can. We know that, you know, that it is a tight race in the West as it is in the East right now, but the only way that we can come out of that in the position that we want to be in is if we, you know, go out there and put it all out there, because It's one thing Jay's talked to. That's one thing Coach has talked to. A talking point he's brought up a few times is when we go out there and we work as hard as we can, we typically get the result. There are a few games. I think Houston might be one of them where sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way. But as long as we stay together and we all collectively work hard as a team, that's what this team's been built upon, and we'll end up the way we want.
Hey, Chris, real quick before we let you go, how do you feel about how the defense has played the last 5-6 games? Because it feels like the performances are there, and unfortunately we just don't quite have as many points to show for it as we would like.
Right. We've had a lot of guys, and not myself being, one of them, and it's just, I think it could definitely be a negative in the fact that, there's not that much consistency. We've had cards, we've had injuries, and so a lot of guys in and out, but at the same time, it allows the players to, get to know one another in different aspects and different situations, and, you see a mistake and you can build from that, Obviously, in general, it is better to have everyone together for a long period of time. You have, defensive relationships that are solid over, a whole season, but we haven't had the chance to, use that. So instead, you got to learn from your mistakes, and you got to learn from your mistakes because everyone makes them.
Chris, appreciate you joining us, man. Good luck to you and the guys tomorrow in the reserve match, but then more importantly, looking ahead to next Tuesday night in Panama in CONCACAF play. Best of luck to you and the guys.
I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris. Good luck tomorrow.
There you go. Chris Schuler, Real Salt Lake defender with us here on Frame. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, and Trey Fitz-Gerald. As we mentioned, they've got the reserve game tomorrow, and then the big one in Panama 1 week from tomorrow night. We'll have that game for you here on ESPN 700. We're going to hop out to a quick break. On the other side, we'll look ahead to that CONCACAF matchup. We'll also take a look at Real Salt Lake. Only 5 games left on the regular season schedule. Where are points going to come from? Where are goals going to come from? And where's Real Salt Lake, frankly, going to end up in this Western Conference playoff race? We'll hit on all of that and more. If you've got questions, you can tweet at us at ESPN 700 James, at BP_TOW, and at Real Salt Lake. Back with more On Frame next, right here on ESPN 700.
I'm going to give it to you. This is On Frame, brought to you by 4 Home Control. If you want to reach the show, dial 877-353-0700 right now on ESPN 700.
And welcome back in On Frame. About 10 minutes left in the show. James Rust, Brian Dunseth, Trey Fitz-Gerald with you. If you've got questions, we're going to be talking a lot of RSL here in the final 10 minutes. If you've got questions you want to fire our direction, you can tweet them at us at ESPN 700 James, at BP_TOW, and at Real Salt Lake. And guys, let's start with the CONCACAF matchup that's 8 days from now. Next Tuesday night, the boys will be in Panama, and it's, again, backs up against the wall. 3 points is a must. Now, Trey, I believe their guys are heading down a few days early, kind of acclimate themselves with the weather and different things like that. Give us kind of the schedule, and then we'll get into what training there, and we'll just kind of look ahead to the Tuesday match.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about this trip. One is, we've talked about the familiarity. So tomorrow night when Canada plays Panama's national team at Estadio Ramon Fernandez, there will be 30,000 people there. When RSL plays Toro FC at the same stadium a week from Tuesday, there may be 500 people there. Who knows? But it's the same place where we beat Arabe Unido a couple years ago, 3-2. Had a pair of Will Johnson goals that night. We'll stay in the same hotel as we did before. For those who haven't been to Panama City, a lot of American and Canadian expatriates, so it's a very kind of modern Western city, at least as far as Central America
a little bit more friendly
goes. And it's just, it's the Caribbean, like we heard Stephen Goff talk about earlier. People are happy, people are content, and so there's not that vitriol against the U.S. that maybe you get in other situations. So the team will go down on Saturday the 15th. It's a long travel day on Delta through Atlanta. and then they'll train at the stadium Sunday and Monday, and then the game is Tuesday night. So it's a must-win game. Chris Schuler is getting healthier. Jamison Olave appears to be getting closer to 100%. He'll play in the reserve game in Kansas City tomorrow. So, Dunny, those are two great additions to have going into the teeth of your schedule.
Well, and we've talked about how solid that Real Salt Lake has been recently. Defensively, 3 shutouts heading into the Houston match. They go 92 minutes and 42 seconds without giving up a goal. And, they end up losing on a penalty kick, the second penalty kick handed out in the night. By the way, that game didn't feel like it needed 2 penalties to be called. Right. It would have been interesting, totally spaced on asking Chris of what his take was. But that being said, it's a very interesting situation that RSL finds themselves in because, right now, it's a team that is solid defensively, but a team that's in search of trying to figure it out offensively and trying to get back to what we saw in the first half of the season.
Now, so that game obviously needing 3 points. Do you guys think, because at this point, Taro FC there's no chance they're moving on from group play. Is there a possibility that they just kind of, they're into their season now, this game doesn't really matter, we're just going to throw some guys out there and get through the 90 minutes?
No, I think they would like the chance to mess with us and mess with Herediano. So they host us on the, what is that day, the 18th, and then I think, a couple weeks later, one of the CONCACAF dates that we are on a bye, they go to Costa Rica and play Herediano. So it's, every point, every game counts. They're still playing for pride. I think what RSL learned from the first game is that we are a better team. But, you heard Nat Borchers on with Bill and Hans today talking about individually they have some quality players. And the thing I think RSL has to know going into a CONCACAF game is you're in a hostile environment. Even if there's not a ton of people there, you get a bad call go against you, that kind of thing. You're just going to have to overcome a lot. We were much better than Arabe and Nido, but 5 minutes in, they've got a penalty kick and they score the first goal, and you're kind of fighting and scratching tooth and nail on an uphill battle.
Well, and that's maybe one last kind of point to the CONCACAF. We played 2 CONCACAF games that we've seen red cards in both CONCACAF games.
Well, listen, at some point it comes down to just pride. These are going to be teams that still have a lot on the line. From a pride perspective, and it's going to be interesting to see, like you said, what type of team is rolled out. But at the end of the day, this is a chance to play spoiler, and even more so, you think about this is the opportunity to put yourself in the shop window. Because if you have a great game, there's a chance that not just the team you're playing against in Major League Soccer maybe takes a look at you down the road or maybe has you in for preseason, but it's also all the other teams in Major League Soccer that are watching, because I guarantee you there will be representatives or players from every single team in Major League Soccer watching this game and watching all the games for that matter. So, I just keep going down to pride. It didn't matter if I was on the worst team or the best team. It didn't matter back in 2005 when we were just struggling to figure it out in the second half of the season. You still go out there and you play for your own pride as well as your team's pride because you play for the shirt. And if you don't, we had guys in 2005 that just flunked it. They did it on purpose. And even after the final cut down date, they got sent packing. And it's because if you don't care, if you don't have that pride, if you don't have any emotion whatsoever, you're just in it for a check. You're not going to be on the team much longer.
Now, Real Salt Lake will be without Captain Kyle Beckerman. He was given the red card in the matchup with Toro FC at Rio Tinto Stadium. So he will not be available for Jason Christ. But again, that game 1 week from tomorrow night in Panama. All right, guys, let's turn our attention back to Major League Soccer. Goals have been a little bit hard to come by for this Real Salt Lake team. We saw in Houston without goal scorer Alvaro Sabarillo, almost able to get out of there with a 0-0 draw and still get that road point. But over the last 10 games, home and away, last 10 games of regular season play, 10 goals for Real Salt Lake, 7 of which came from Alvaro Sabarillo, 2 from Will Johnson, 1 from Nat Borchers. If we take it even a step farther, looking at the road games, in the last 6 road games, so going back to right after that Chivas USA win on the road, 3-0, Jason Christ said it was the best performance of his team. From that point on the road, 6 games and only 1 goal, that coming August 11th in Vancouver in stoppage time from Nat Borchers. Dunny, where are the goals going to come from, and where is RSL lacking as to why they're not finding the back of the net?
Listen, that's a $1 million question right now. I think it's not only for the coaching staff, but for the players as well. Sabo is once again proven that he is probably the most valuable player offensively in terms of that final product. At the end of the day, you got to hope that Fabian figures out a way to get back to where he was come that summer break. That Javi steps up and has the free kicks and the opportunities on set pieces to serve quality balls in. And for me, it goes back to RSL just being dangerous in the box. And that's when you have Homison, you have Nat healthy. The quality of service allows you to take educated runs to get in good spots because you know where the ball is going to be played. You know there's going to be a consistent area where you can get to, and you're going to have the opportunity to get on the end of it. But listen, at the end of the day, you need players that normally don't, score goals for you consistently to start stepping up and finding the back of the net. And right now, I think it's a problem that every single player on RSL knows that they have. And I think the hope was to have Paulo Jr. chip in a few more, probably hit the 6-7 digit mark, and have Fabi and Sabo hitting double digits like they did last year, because that's what RSL needs. And there's still not plenty of time, but there's still time to get that form back on. And like we've always talked about, the reliance on Sabo, at sometimes it's a little too much.
Well, the nice thing is that the 3 road trips we still have left in MLS play, at Chivas, at LA, and at Seattle are the 3 places we've already won this year. So that's kind of a quirky thing. It doesn't really mean anything other than could give us a little bit of confidence going into those places. And then, again, even going to Toro next week, we've won a CONCACAF group game in that stadium against a Panamanian team. So there's a lot to build on, but like Dunny said, somebody's got to step up and help Sabo with the scoring load, and we're not seeing goals from the midfield. Kyle has a few, Will has a few. We're not seeing the set-piece goals that we've traditionally seen from Homison and that. I mean, Kwame has come so close so many times recently. Maybe Schuler, with him getting back in, maybe he can get a few.
That's going to do it for us. You've been listening to On Frame. For Trey, for Dunny, for our producer Trevor, I'm James, ESPN 700.
Quickly opened up to a 20-point lead. Purdue trying to avoid that same fate as Lewis Jackson puts it on the floor, drives right side, he lays it up and in, and gets fouled. Lewis Jackson, the junior out of Decatur, Illinois, strong to the chin. He's headed to strike.
Then we break it down.
Speed is his game. Already coming up with a steal, then recognizing as they sent Smith off the double screen on the weak side, he was opportunistic to the paint. Those are the types of plays that Coach Matt Painter wants to see from Blue Jack.
Plus all the dunks.
Hall thinks about the 18-foot jumper, instead passes off to Sheehy with a right-handed, jam. Drive left side, and the two-handed hammer.
Now to right, drives in the lane, leaves one for Rubik, who throws it down with 2 hands.
Compass Media Networks, your only home for college hoops.
Let's pause 10 seconds for station identification. This is the National Football League on Compass Media Networks.
This is where the Utes play. KALL North Salt Lake, ESPN 700.
Tim Cates back inside our Compass Media Network studios in Los Angeles. It's the Oakland Raiders and the San Diego Chargers. Kickoff from the O.Co Coliseum is coming up in just a few minutes. Also coming up, a special pregame performance at the O from Ice Cube, and the national anthem being performed tonight by Gene Simmons. But a pleasure now to spend a couple of minutes with Raiders defensive tackle Tommy Kelly, big number 93. And first off, Tommy, after the long training camp and the long preseason, how excited are you and the guys to get this regular season started?
Well, just ready to get over with the preseason, man. Just get into the real action, man. And plus, San Diego's a rivalry game, a division game, a big game, so it ain't hard to get up for this game at all.
Now, Tommy, the Raiders opening on Monday night, center stage for everybody to watch. Do you get a little bit more excited, the fact that you guys are on Monday Night Football?
I mean, anytime you play on Monday night, you're the only game, is on that night. So, it's an opportunity for everybody in the league to see you play. So, it's a time for you to, make a name for yourself. So, you always want to do good on that night.
Tommy Kelly, Raiders defensive tackle, is my guest. Raiders kicking off the regular season versus the San Diego Chargers on Monday Night Football. Now, Tommy, a new head coach, a new defensive staff. How has the transition been with the new coaches and the new defensive scheme?
I mean, it's been easy for me. I can't really speak for nobody else, but it's been real easy for me, you know. I mean, the game plan is real simple, man. You just want to play aggressive and play hard and play physical. So, you know, you just go out there. They just fit my profile to a T, so I don't have no problem with it.
Now, Tommy, Coach Dennis Allen, a defensive background. I know he's still involved with the coaching and the game planning, helping out defensive coordinator Jason Tarver, getting preparation each week. What type of guy, though, is he to play for?
Oh, yeah, Coach Allen, man, you know, he's real straightforward. You know, he tell you what he needs you to do, what you need to do, and how he needs you to play within the game plan. So, I mean, man, he's real straightforward. So, as a player, man, you really can't ask no more from a coach as long as he's straightforward with you and truthful. So, you know, Coach Allen is both of those. So, you know, it's really easy playing for him.
Raiders defensive tackle Tommy Kelly is my guest. Raiders getting ready to take on the Chargers here on Monday Night Football. Now, Tommy, the front four, yourself, Richard Seymour, Matt Shaughnessy, Lamar Houston. You've been dominating the last couple of years. Great against the run. Very active in getting at the quarterback with over 30 sacks between you guys the last 2 years. I know that's something you guys take a lot of pride in, right?
Oh, most definitely. You know, we all want to be able to rush traffic, but, you know, you always is best that, you know, if you can play the run and pass, that means you don't have to come off field, and then one of us don't like coming off field. So, you know, we just go hard and play hard for each other and just leave it like it is.
Now, Tommy, last year injuries really hurt this Raiders team on defense. The secondary was especially hit hard on offense. Running back Darren McFadden, well, he was out for almost half the year. In fact, he and Carson Palmer never saw the field together last regular season. I know it must be exciting to look around that locker room, see everybody back, see all the healthy bodies around, and know that, hey, last year you were 8-8 with all the injuries. When everybody's healthy, it's kind of scary how good we can be, right?
Almost there. We got a lot of talented players. We just, you know, people got to be on the field together, gel together. You know, Darren got to be on the field with Carson. You know, they got to get into with each other. So, you know, man, it feels good to see both of them out there together. You know.
Now, Tommy, tonight you got the Chargers at home, Monday Night Football. Last year you split the 2 games with them. The game in San Diego, you really got after Phillip Rivers, 4 sacks in that game. They are a team, though, likes to throw the ball. Phillip Rivers, not afraid to sling that ball. Talk a little bit about the game plan going into tonight. Is it all about getting after Phillip Rivers?
Well, I mean, they throw, but I mean, Chargers are real balanced. They like to run the ball too, man. You know, they just like to take their shots. They take a lot of shots, man. You know, Norv and Phillips, you know, they work well together. So, you know, I mean, they got a real explosive offense. You know, we just want to hold them down, you know, as much as possible. And, you know, you got to put pressure. You know, if you're going to beat San Diego, you got to get pressure on field. So, you know, we know what we got to get done.
Raiders defensive tackle Tommy Kelly is my guest. Final question, Tommy. Expectations of this team. Last year, as we talked about, 8-8, a lot of injuries. You almost won the division, almost made the playoffs, came down to the final game of the season. Knowing that, and knowing that you got a lot of guys back from injuries, you've added some key players at different positions, I imagine